I subjected myself to the Mortuary Assistant movies so you wouldn't have to. And believe me, that's not hyperbole. If you're foolishly holding out hope for a faithful game adaptation, turn back now. Run! Because within the first 15 minutes, it becomes sickeningly clear that this isn't merely an adaptation that misses the point. It actively pummels and dismembers everything that made the original game a psychological triumph. Instead of allowing the suffocating dread to seep in, like the embalming fluid into a fresh corpse, it careens into a frenzy of forced jump scares and expository diarrhea. Leaving the atmosphere clinically DOA, or dead on arrival. If you crave reviews that peel back the skin and exposes the festering truth rather than tiptoeing around it like a pallbearer on eggshells, then hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if this abomination worked for you, or perhaps if you, like the 5 lost souls who streamed it on launch day, were utterly bewildered by its existence. Because make no mistake, this cinematic embalming fluid is going to split audiences for all the wrong reasons.
No shit.
The biggest problem? The pacing. The game, a masterclass in slow burn terror, thrives on the agonizing solitude of mundane tasks, where even silent tremor in the mortuary air feels pregnant with unseen horrors. The chilling quiet is the very crucible in which its psychological torment is forced. The movie, however, treats such a nuance like a cancerous growth, hacking it away to immediately blast you with cheap jump scares. It is like a jump scare compilation video stitched together by a chimpanzee, devoid of setup, consequence, or God forbid, actual tension.
Not a great plan.
Those moments where a person shows up and it pops a bang sound. Yeah, those cheap, horrendous, by-the-book jump scare galore shit. We've seen it for the past decade. Everything feels fabricated and about as natural as a clown at a funeral. Then there is Rebecca Owens, who should be the terrified yet resilient anchor for this narrative, much like the player in the game who grapples with the slow, maddening realization of their predicament. But here, she's written with all the intellectual depth of a freshly lobotomized cadaver. From the outset, something is clearly off with her, and bless her fictional heart, she's about as subtle as a demon belching fire. We're meant to believe she's being manipulated by some shadowy force. Yes, the force is strong with this walking plot device.
Oh, come on!
But the film never bothers to ground her descent into madness in any remotely intentional way. It is not psychological pressure building like the encroaching influence of a malevolent entity. It is just fake, inconsistent characterization that makes her less a protagonist and more a puppet whose strings are perpetually tangled. This intellectual vacuum only intensifies as the story lurches forward. Rebecca constantly reacts too late, too confused, too utterly blind to information she's practically tripping over. The film's spoon-feature clues, signs, and blatant warnings, and she still bats at them with the confused helplessness of a fly against a window pane. This doesn't build tension. No, matter of fact, it annihilates it. So we're not watching someone struggle heroically against overwhelming odds. We're witnessing a character fail to grasp even the most basic facts already laid bare, which is less scary and more infuriating.
What does that have to do with it?
No. He's got a point.
And then we have Raymond Delver, Rebecca's boss, who I can only assume moonlights as a villain in his off hours, because the moment he shovels onto screen, any semblance of mystery collapses like an improperly stored cadaver. Does he know what's going on? Oh, absolutely. He radiates an aura of "I'm probably evil and definitely withholding crucial information" with every twitch and cryptic utterance. Even a blind mortician would recognize this man as rotten to the core. This completely warps everything that follows, because instead of guiding Rebecca or, preserving her well-being, he actively orchestrates her demise. He watches, grinning inwardly, as the very entities that plague Mortuary, the very same entities that demand strict adherence to rituals and binding rites in the game, latch onto her soul. His role isn't that of a mentor, it's that of a sadistic puppet master, gleefully waiting to see how far the corruption spreads before he claps his hands with satisfaction. And that, dear viewer, is where the narrative descends into outright farce. The movie tries to paint him as this seasoned expert, intimately familiar with the mortuary's dark secrets. Yet, this expert allows his young apprentice to waltz into literal procession without so much as a proper warning or preventative ritual. The film's pathetic excuse? He wasn't entirely sure if he wanted to sacrifice her yet. This doesn't make him complex, it makes him a blithering idiot or an outright psychopath, operating with an incompetence that borders on criminal negligence. By the time the utterly unearned endings arrives and he offers a limp apology, it's not a moment of catharsis. It is the film awkwardly trying to sew up a massive plot hole with threadbare justifications. If he truly understood the danger, if he truly knew the binding rights and the consequences of demonic attachment like the game implies, such figures should, then letting Rebecca stumble through a gauntlet of spiritual torment without clear intervention makes him not only careless but also spectacularly irresponsible in a way that shatters any remaining thread of an already crumbling plot.
How? How? How?
I don't know!
This grotesque mishandling ties into the movie's most egregious sin. It explains everything while illuminating nothing. Instead of allowing the horror to claw its way into your psyche, it barrages you with an endless stream of rules, instructions, and systems. It is less a narrative and more a gruesome step-by-step wiki guide for a game you've already played. There are moments where you expect a mouse cursor to appear on screen because Rebecca is being given explicit remedial instructions. Burn this, inject that elixir, follow these precise steps. This eliminates all uncertainty, all agency, and all horror. The very essence of the game's terror lies in the unknown. The creeping suspicion that something is profoundly wrong and your desperate attempts to understand and control it. Here, every ambiguous whisper of the otherworldly is reduced to a quantifiable set of directives, turning existential dread into a glorified checklist. Even the lore, or cornerstone of the game's unsettling depth, where horror blossoms from chaotic, inexplicable forces, is systematically gutted. The movie transforms it into something structured, manageable, and utterly devoid of psychological impact. The original revels in the feeling of being utterly out of control, a pawn in a cosmic ritual. This movie spoon-feeds you logic, turning a visceral experience of demonic attachment into a sterile academic exercise.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
To its credit, and I say this through gritted teeth, the practical effects are indeed solid. Some of the visual depictions of the cadavers manage to elicit a flicker of the game's intended discomfort. And yes, the mortuary itself is recreated with an almost painful fidelity, with small details that might make a fan shed a single frustrated tear for what could have been. Visually, it nails the aesthetic, like a perfectly preserved corpse in a coffin. But tone is far more crucial than surface level visuals, and here's where the movie's entire body rigor mortises. Later on, it executes a jarring tonal shift, morphing into something resembling the B-movie theatrics of Evil Dead.
Bruh.
This is my boomstick!
Complete with exaggerated possession sequences and ear-spinning cacophony. Subtle tension? Completely gone. Replaced by a shrieking, unearned spectacle. Rebecca's eyes go full demon rave, and the triple voice over demonic sound effect is so laughably cheap, it sounds like someone stumbled upon Audacity, layered a few tracks, and declared it ready for theatrical release. It is not terrifying, it's an auditory assault that screams budget software rather than ancient evil.
Oh, man. Oh, God. Oh, man.
By the time the final act rolls around, the narrative is a messy, incoherent sprawl. Rebecca is bound to the mortuary in a way that feels flimsy. Raymond's motives are even more baffling, and instead of a clear resolution, we're left with a deflated setup for a sequel nobody asked for, delivering confusion rather than closure. It's like being promised a grand ritual binding a demon only for it to fizzle out into a wet fart. When you peel back all the decaying layers, the core issue is horrifyingly clear. This isn't a film that merely takes a different direction, it's a cinematic autopsy performed by someone who utterly failed to grasp the autonomy of the original game. It surgically removes tension in a favor of clunky exposition, replaces immersive atmosphere with constant jarring interruptions, and transmutes the game's masterful subtle horror into an artificial, grotesque mockery. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Mortuary Assistant movie is such an inexplicably frustrating experience. Everything is technically there on the surface, particularly laid out like organs on a dissection tray. But the soul, the beating, terrified heart of what made the game terrifying, it is nowhere to be found. It's a beautifully rendered husk, utterly devoid of life.